In a quiet little town where nothing much ever happened, life for the kids at Lincoln Middle School was pretty ordinary. They went to class, goofed around during recess, and tried their best to make it through math without falling asleep. But, every now and then, something would happen that broke the monotony of their daily routine. One such moment came on a chilly Tuesday afternoon in Mr. Thompson's social studies class. The room was buzzing with chatter as usual. The lesson had shifted from boring textbook definitions to something more exciting: government jobs. Kids loved talking about what their parents did for a living, because it gave them bragging rights. One kid said his uncle was a firefighter who once saved a cat stuck in a tree. Another claimed her mom worked for NASA and helped launch rockets into space. Everyone leaned forward, wide-eyed, soaking up these stories like they were hearing about superheroes. Then, out of nowhere, a soft voice piped up from the back corner of the classroom. It belonged to a boy named Ethan, who rarely spoke unless he absolutely had to. His words were barely audible over the hum of conversations, but when people realized what he'd said, the whole room froze. "My dad works at the Pentagon," Ethan muttered, staring at his desk as if he wished it would swallow him whole. For a split second, there was silence, a heavy, awkward kind of quiet. Then, almost simultaneously, laughter erupted. Some kids giggled nervously, while others let out loud guffaws. A few even slapped their desks, doubling over in mock disbelief. The idea of someone's dad working at the Pentagon, a place most of them only knew from movies or conspiracy theories, seemed absurd. How could anyone from their tiny town possibly have a connection to such an important building? Even Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, though he quickly masked his surprise. "That's interesting, Ethan," he said diplomatically, moving on to the next topic before things got too uncomfortable. But the damage was done. Ethan slouched lower in his chair, his face turning bright red. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone, hoping the ground beneath him would open up and save him from further embarrassment. What none of the students, or even Mr. Thompson, knew was that Ethan wasn't lying. His dad really did work at the Pentagon. Sure, he didn't wear a fancy uniform or carry a briefcase full of top-secret documents like you see in spy movies. Instead, he spent long hours behind a computer screen, analyzing data and helping protect the country from cyber threats. To Ethan, his dad was a hero, even if no one else understood just how vital his job was. But sitting there in that classroom, surrounded by snickers and sideways glances, Ethan felt anything but proud. All he wanted was for the clock to hurry up so he could escape to the safety of home. Little did he know this wouldn't be the last time the subject of his dad's job came up, and the next time, it would change everything. A few weeks passed, and life at Lincoln Middle School returned to its usual rhythm. The laughter over Ethan's claim about his dad working at the Pentagon had mostly faded into the background, replaced by new gossip or inside jokes among the students. Occasionally, though, someone would bring it up as a playful jab. "Hey, when's your dad gonna send us secret codes from the Pentagon?" they'd tease, not realizing how much those words stung. Ethan tried his best to brush it off. He knew the truth, and that was enough for him. Still, the memory of that day lingered like a shadow he couldn't quite shake. Every time someone mentioned it, even in jest, he felt that same hot flush creep up his neck. But Ethan kept quiet, burying himself in his schoolwork and spending most of his free time sketching pictures in the margins of his notebooks. It was easier to stay invisible than to invite more attention. Then, one crisp Monday morning, an announcement came over the intercom during first period. The principal's voice crackled through the speakers, cutting through the low murmur of classroom chatter. "Good morning, students. We have a special guest visiting our school today who will be speaking to several classes about national security and civic responsibility. Please welcome them warmly." The news sent a ripple of curiosity through the hallways. Who could this mysterious visitor be? Was it a local police officer? A politician? Maybe someone famous? Speculation ran wild as students whispered theories between classes. By the time third period rolled around, everyone in Mr. Thompson's social studies class was buzzing with anticipation. When the door creaked open mid-lesson, all eyes shot toward the front of the room. Standing in the doorway was a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a sharp navy blue suit. His shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and he carried a sleek black briefcase that looked like it belonged in a movie scene. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't just his polished appearance. It was the air of authority he carried with him. You could feel it the moment he stepped inside, like the room itself stood a little straighter. "Good morning, everyone," the man said in a calm but commanding voice. "Thank you for having me today. My name is David, and I'm here to talk to you about the importance of public service and protecting our nation." As he began his presentation, the students listened intently. He spoke about his work at the Department of Defense, explaining how teams of experts collaborated to keep the country safe from cyber attacks and other threats. He shared stories about the challenges of balancing technology with security, using examples that were easy to understand without giving away any classified information. The kids leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. This wasn't some boring lecture. It felt like they were getting a glimpse into a hidden world. About halfway through the talk, the man paused and smiled. "Before we continue, I want to mention something personal. I have 2 children, one of whom is sitting right here in this very classroom." He scanned the room slowly, his gaze landing on Ethan. "My son has been telling me all about your discussions on government, institutions. It's great to see young minds so engaged." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, like a tidal wave, realization swept across the room. Heads turned sharply toward Ethan, whose face was now glowing redder than ever. Gasps filled the air as pieces clicked into place. The man standing before them, the one talking about national security and working at the Pentagon, was Ethan's dad. Whispers erupted immediately. "No way. That's his dad? I can't believe it." Even Mr. Thompson looked stunned, his mouth slightly agape as he glanced back and forth between Ethan and the speaker. Ethan, meanwhile, sat frozen in his seat, unsure whether to sink into the floor or bolt out of the classroom. David, sensing the sudden tension, chuckled lightly. "Don't worry, Ethan, you're not in trouble," he joked, easing the mood. Then, turning back to the class, he continued his presentation as if nothing unusual had happened. But the energy in the room had shifted entirely. Gone was the casual indifference. Instead, there was awe, and maybe a touch of guilt. By the end of the session, the students bombarded David with questions. They wanted to know everything. What did he do exactly? Had he ever met important leaders? Did he really help stop hackers? David answered patiently, making sure to keep things simple, while still emphasizing the significance of his role. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of class, the students filed out slowly, many stopping to thank David for coming. Ethan lingered behind, gathering his books with trembling hands. As he stood up to leave, his dad walked over and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You okay, buddy?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, though his emotions were a tangled mess. Relief, pride, embarrassment, they all swirled together, leaving him unsure of how to feel. But one thing was certain: the laughter was over. And tomorrow, when he walked into school, things would never be the same again. The next day at Lincoln Middle School, the atmosphere felt different, charged, almost electric. Word of Ethan's dad's visit had spread like wildfire through the hallways. By lunchtime, it seemed like everyone knew about the man in the sharp suit who worked at the Pentagon and had shown up in Mr. Thompson's classroom. Students whispered excitedly in groups, piecing together details they'd heard secondhand or imagined themselves. Some even tried to spot Ethan during passing periods, hoping to catch a glimpse of the boy whose dad was suddenly the center of attention. For Ethan, walking into school that morning felt surreal. The same hallways he'd navigated unnoticed for years now felt like a stage where all eyes were on him. At first, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact as he hurried to his locker. But it didn't take long before people started approaching him directly. A group of kids from his science class cornered him near the water fountain. "Hey, Ethan," one of them said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "We just wanted to say, sorry for laughing when you said your dad worked at the Pentagon. We didn't mean anything by it." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected an apology, Not from these guys, anyway. They weren't exactly close friends. They were more like acquaintances who occasionally paired up for lab projects. Still, their words carried weight. "It's okay," Ethan mumbled, shuffling his feet. "I get it. It sounded kinda crazy." Another kid chimed in, clearly trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, but turns out it wasn't crazy at all. Your dad's actually super cool. Did you know he helped stop some big cyber attack last year? That's what my brother said anyway." Ethan shrugged, unsure how much of that was true. His dad rarely talked about his work in detail, always saying it was better to keep certain things private. But hearing others talk about his father with such admiration made something inside Ethan swell with pride. For the first time, he realized that maybe his dad wasn't just a regular guy doing a job. He was someone people looked up to, even if Ethan himself hadn't fully understood why, until now. By the end of the day, Ethan found himself answering questions from classmates he barely knew. Some asked technical stuff about cybersecurity, while others wondered what it was like growing up with a dad who worked at such an iconic place. Ethan did his best to respond honestly, though he admitted he didn't know all the answers. "He's just normal, I guess," Ethan said at one point, shrugging. "Like he makes pancakes on Saturdays and yells at me to clean my room. But yeah, he does important stuff too." What surprised Ethan most was how quickly attitudes shifted. Kids, who used to ignore him, now sought him out to chat. Teachers greeted him with warmer smiles, and even Mr. Thompson pulled him aside after class to say how impressed he was with how Ethan handled everything. "You've got a lot of character, Ethan," the teacher told him sincerely. "Not many kids could stay calm under that kind of pressure. I'm proud of you." Those words stuck with Ethan long after he left school that afternoon. As he walked home, kicking pebbles along the sidewalk, he replayed the events of the past few days in his mind. He thought about the laughter, the embarrassment, and finally, the shock and awe that followed his dad's appearance. It was overwhelming, sure, but also strangely empowering. For so long, Ethan had felt like he didn't quite fit in, like he was invisible compared to the louder, more confident kids around him. Now, though, he realized being different wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It just took people longer to see the value in it. At dinner that night, Ethan's dad noticed the change in his son's demeanor. "You seem lighter tonight," he remarked, raising an eyebrow over his plate of spaghetti. "Everything okay?" Ethan hesitated, twirling his fork absently. "People stopped laughing today," he admitted quietly. "They came up to me and apologized, and they kept asking questions about you." His dad chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "Well, I hope you didn't let them think I'm some kind of action hero. Trust me, most days I'm just staring at a computer screen, drinking way too much coffee." "It's not just that," Ethan said, looking up. "They're treating me differently now. Like they actually see me." His dad's expression softened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You know, Ethan, people don't always believe things until they see proof. That doesn't mean you should ever doubt yourself or your truth. You've always been special, not because of me or my job, but because of who you are." Ethan nodded slowly, letting those words sink in. Deep down, he knew his dad was right. This whole experience wasn't just about proving a point or earning respect from his peers. It was about learning to stand tall, even when others doubted him. It was about finding strength in vulnerability and owning his story, no matter how unusual it might seem. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began to step out of his shell in ways he never had before. Encouraged by the newfound confidence he felt, he decided to join the debate club, a decision that shocked even himself. Public speaking had always terrified him, but now he wanted to challenge that fear. During his first meeting, he stumbled over his words and fidgeted nervously with his notes. But instead of retreating into silence, he pushed through, determined to improve. To his surprise, the other members cheered him on, offering tips and encouragement. One afternoon, after a particularly lively practice session, the club advisor pulled Ethan aside. "You've got potential," she told him with a warm smile. "Keep showing up, and I think you'll surprise yourself." Ethan grinned, feeling a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was his chance to prove, to himself more than anyone else, that he could rise above the doubts and fears that had held him back for so long. As the months went by, Ethan continued to grow. He became more outspoken in class, participating in discussions and even volunteering to lead group projects. His grades improved and teachers began noticing his efforts. Slowly but surely, Ethan transformed from the quiet kid in the corner to someone who commanded attention, not because of his dad's job, but because of the person he was becoming. Looking back, Ethan realized that the laughter and teasing had been painful, yes, but they had also taught him something invaluable: resilience. Life would always throw curveballs, moments where he'd feel small or invisible, but if he could face those challenges head-on, stay true to himself, and trust in his own worth, he'd come out stronger on the other side. And deep down, he knew his dad would be proud, not just of the progress he'd made, but of the courage it took to make it happen. As the school year rolled on, Ethan's transformation became impossible to ignore. The once shy boy who preferred blending into the background was now stepping into the spotlight in ways that surprised even himself. His newfound confidence didn't just stay within the walls of Lincoln Middle School. It spilled over into every part of his life. At home, he started sharing more about his day, recounting stories from debate club or describing how he'd stood up for a classmate being teased. His dad listened intently, nodding along and offering advice when asked, but mostly letting Ethan take the lead. It was clear to both of them that something had shifted. One crisp Friday afternoon, Ethan came bounding through the front door, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and a grin plastered across his face. "Guess what?" he said, barely containing his excitement as he plopped down at the kitchen table. His dad looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading, amused by his son's energy. "What's got you so fired up?" "I made it onto the team for the regional debate competition," Ethan exclaimed, practically vibrating with pride. "We're going to compete against other schools next month." His dad's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's incredible, Ethan. I didn't know you were interested in debating. When did this happen?" Ethan shrugged, still grinning. "After, everything with the Pentagon thing, I guess I just wanted to try something new. Something that scared me, And now here we are." His dad leaned back in his chair, studying his son with a mixture of pride and admiration. "Well, I'm proud of you for taking that step. Debating isn't easy. It takes guts to stand up there and argue your point, especially when people might not agree with you." "Yeah, well," Ethan said, scratching the back of his neck sheepishly. "It's kind of like what you told me before. About owning my truth, even if others don't get it right away. That's kind of what debating feels like. Except instead of laughing, they're arguing back." His dad chuckled, shaking his head. "You're smarter than you give yourself credit for, kiddo." The weeks leading up to the competition flew by in a blur of research, practice sessions, and late-night brainstorming. Ethan threw himself into preparation, determined to prove that he belonged on the team. His teammates, noticing his dedication, began relying on him more during mock debates, trusting his ability to think quickly and articulate his thoughts clearly. Even the club advisor remarked on how much Ethan had grown since joining. Finally, the big day arrived. The regional competition was held in a large auditorium at a nearby high school, packed with students, teachers, and parents. Ethan felt his stomach churn as he looked out at the crowd, gripping the edge of the podium to steady himself. This was nothing like standing in front of his classmates. It was bigger, louder, and far more intimidating. But as he glanced toward the back of the room where his dad sat watching proudly, a wave of calm washed over him. He could do this. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he took a deep breath and launched into his argument. His voice wavered slightly, at first, but as he gained momentum, it grew stronger and more confident. By the time he finished, the audience erupted into applause. Ethan stepped back, his heart racing, unsure whether he'd done enough to impress the judges. But regardless of the outcome, he knew he'd given it his all. Later that evening, after the awards ceremony, Ethan and his dad sat together in a quiet corner of the auditorium. The team hadn't won the top prize, but Ethan had earned an individual award for Most Improved Speaker. Holding the small trophy in his hands, he couldn't stop smiling. "You should be really proud of yourself," his dad said, clapping him gently on the shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Ethan. You've shown everyone, including yourself, that you can rise to the occasion when it matters most." Ethan nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Thanks, Dad, for everything. I don't think I would have done any of this if it weren't for, everything that happened earlier this year." His dad smiled softly. "I think you would have figured it out eventually. Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it. Sometimes those lessons come from tough moments, but they shape us in ways we don't realize until later." Ethan thought about that for a moment, letting the words sink in. He realized his dad was right. The laughter, the teasing, the embarrassment, they had all been hard to endure at the time. But looking back, he understood that those experiences had pushed him to grow. They had forced him to confront his fears, to find strength in vulnerability, and to embrace the parts of himself he'd once tried to hide. Over the next few months, Ethan continued to thrive. He became a key member of the debate team, helping his school secure victories in local competitions. Teachers praised his leadership skills, and classmates sought him out for advice on projects or assignments. Even outside of academics, Ethan found himself branching out. He joined the art club, rediscovering his love for drawing, and volunteered at a community center on weekends. Each new experience added another layer to his growing sense of self-worth. But perhaps the most significant change was the way Ethan interacted with others. Gone was the hesitation that used to hold him back. Instead, he approached people with openness and curiosity, eager to learn their stories and share his own. He realized that everyone carried burdens or insecurities, even if they didn't show it on the surface. And by treating others with kindness and empathy, he could make a difference not just in their lives but in his own as well. By the time graduation rolled around, Ethan had become one of the most respected students in his grade. As he stood on stage delivering the valedictorian speech, he reflected on the journey that had brought him there. He spoke candidly about the challenges he'd faced, the laughter, the doubt, the moments of wanting to disappear, and how those struggles had ultimately shaped him into the person he was today. "When I was younger," Ethan said, pausing, to scan the sea of faces in the audience, "I thought success meant fitting in, being liked by everyone. But now I know that true success comes from staying true to yourself, even when it's hard, from finding courage in the face of fear and resilience in the face of adversity." He went on to thank his family, teachers, and friends for supporting him along the way, saving a special mention for his dad. "You taught me that it's okay to be different, to stand out, and to believe in myself, even when others don't understand. Thank you for showing me what it means to live with purpose and integrity." As the crowd erupted into applause, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. Looking out at the audience, he spotted his dad wiping away a tear, his expression filled with pride. In that moment, Ethan knew he'd accomplished far more than just academic success. He'd discovered who he truly was, and he was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, as the ceremony came to a close and students tossed their caps into the air, Ethan walked off stage with a smile. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he was prepared to face it with the same courage and determination that had carried him this far. After all, he'd already proven to himself, and to everyone else, that he was capable of greatness. Ethan's journey didn't end with middle school graduation. If anything, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges, triumphs, and moments that would shape him into the person he was destined to become. High school brought its own set of obstacles: tougher classes, higher expectations, and the constant pressure to figure out what came next. But Ethan faced it all with the same quiet determination that had carried him through those difficult days in Mr. Thompson's classroom. By his sophomore year, Ethan had cemented his place as one of the standout students at Lincoln High. He wasn't just excelling academically, he was thriving socially too. The kid who once dreaded speaking up in class now led discussions, debated confidently during Model United Nations conferences, and even helped organize school events. His art club projects were displayed prominently in the hallways, earning praise from teachers and peers alike. It seemed like every corner of the school had been touched by Ethan's growing influence. But success didn't come without its share of struggles. There were times when self-doubt crept back in, whispering cruel reminders of the boy he used to be, the one who'd rather shrink into the shadows than risk being seen. During one particularly grueling week of exams, Ethan found himself overwhelmed by stress. He stayed up late cramming for tests, second-guessing his answers and wondering if he'd ever measure up to the standards he'd set for himself. One night, after hours of staring blankly at a math problem, he finally broke down. His dad, hearing the muffled sounds of frustration coming from Ethan's room, knocked softly on the door before stepping inside. "Hey," he said gently, sitting on the edge of Ethan's bed. "What's going on?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, Dad. I feel like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough. Like I'm always chasing something I can't quite reach." His dad nodded thoughtfully, letting the silence stretch for a moment before responding. "You know, Ethan, life isn't about perfection. It's about progress. You've already come so far. From that shy kid in middle school to the confident young man sitting here today. Don't lose sight of how much you've grown because you're focused on some imaginary finish line." Those words struck a chord deep within Ethan. For so long he'd been fixated on proving himself, not just to others, but to himself. But his dad was right. Growth wasn't about reaching some arbitrary goal. It was about embracing the journey, flaws and all. That realization gave Ethan the clarity he needed to push forward, not just through exams, but through whatever challenges lay ahead. As senior year approached, Ethan began thinking seriously about the future. College applications loomed large, and the weight of decision-making pressed heavily on his shoulders. What did he want to study? Where did he see himself in 5, 10, 20 years? These questions swirled endlessly in his mind, keeping him awake at night. But instead of letting anxiety consume him, Ethan decided to tackle them head-on. He spent weekends researching programs, visiting campuses, and talking to alumni. He sought advice from teachers, counselors, and even former debate teammates who had gone off to pursue their dreams. Slowly but surely, a path began to emerge. Inspired by his dad's work at the Pentagon, Ethan developed an interest in cybersecurity, a field that combined technology, strategy, and public service. It felt like the perfect blend of his passions and strengths. When acceptance letters started rolling in, Ethan couldn't believe how far he'd come. Holding the thick envelope from his top-choice university, he felt a surge of pride unlike anything he'd experienced before. This wasn't just a ticket to college. It was validation of everything he'd worked for over the years. And when he shared the news with his dad, the look of pure joy on his father's face made the moment even sweeter. On the day of his high school graduation, Ethan stood backstage, waiting for his turn to walk across the stage and receive his diploma. As he listened to the speeches and watched his classmates file past, memories flooded back. The laughter in Mr. Thompson's classroom, the shock on everyone's faces when his dad walked in, the countless hours spent debating, drawing, and dreaming. Each memory was a thread woven into the tapestry of his life, shaping him into the person he was today. When Ethan finally stepped onto the stage, the auditorium erupted into applause. Friends cheered loudly, teachers clapped enthusiastically, and his dad, who had somehow managed to sneak into the front row, beamed with uncontainable pride. As Ethan shook hands with the principal and accepted his diploma, he paused for a brief moment to take it all in. This wasn't just a celebration of academic achievement. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of staying true to oneself. Later that evening, as Ethan sat surrounded by family and friends at a small gathering, someone asked him what advice he'd give to younger kids facing similar struggles. Without hesitation, Ethan replied, "Don't let anyone make you feel small. People might laugh or doubt you, but that doesn't change the truth about who you are. Believe in yourself, even when it's hard. And remember, you're stronger than you think." His words resonated deeply with everyone present, especially his dad, who raised his glass in a silent toast. In that moment, Ethan realized that his journey wasn't just about personal growth. It was about inspiring others to find their own strength. Whether through his debates, his artwork, or simply the way he carried himself, Ethan had become a beacon of hope for those around him. Years later, as Ethan graduated from college and embarked on his career in cybersecurity, he often reflected on the lessons he'd learned along the way. The laughter in that middle school classroom had taught him humility, while his dad's unwavering support had shown him the value of believing in someone, even when they doubted themselves. Those experiences had shaped him into a compassionate, driven individual who understood the importance of empathy and perseverance. And though life continued to throw challenges his way, Ethan faced them with the same quiet confidence that had carried him through the toughest moments of his childhood. Because he knew deep down that the boy who once feared ridicule had grown into a man capable of changing the world, one step at a time.